What are the Scotch whisky regions and why do people talk about them so often? Well, the Scotch whisky regions were formed as people began associating different whisky flavours with 5 main areas of Scotland. Those areas are the Highlands, Speyside, Islay, Campbeltown and the Lowlands. You might be wondering, what exactly does the location of a distillery matter, or does it matter at all? Well, don't worry, because we're about to reveal the lesser known truth about the Scotch whisky regions. First, let's dive into a general overview of what each region is known for and try and understand what people might mean when they mention these different styles of whisky from these specific places. Let's start at the Highlands. This is geographically the largest region. It's home to over 25 distilleries, although that number's changing all the time. And it's known for having one of the most diverse ranges of flavour. That's due to the vast size of the region, and it's often broken down into sub-regions in the north, east, south and west. So what do you expect to get from whisky from this region? Well, it's generally identified as having full-bodied whiskies, and you can think of distilleries like Glenmorangie or Dalmore that are sweet and rich in character. There are lighter, fruitier whiskies in the east. Southern distilleries in the Highlands tend to be slightly more delicate, while the west coast can often bring a kind of smoky or a briny character as well. Let's move to Speyside. It's the kind of whisky mecca for Scotland. It's by far the most densely populated whisky region, with over 60 distilleries packed into a relatively small area. In fact, Speyside makes over a third of Scotland's distillery count and produces around half of all Scotch. This region also is home to some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, such as Glenfiddich, Macallan and Glenlivet, worldwide famous names. And although Speyside hosts a wide range of flavours, it's most famous for its sweet, rich expressions, generally with very little peat, making it a great starting point for people early on in their whisky journey. Let's move to the famous island of Islay. Venturing onto these rugged shores, this region, this island, is renowned for its robust, smoky character. The flavours from Islay tend to be slightly more refined to those who crave peaty, smoky and briny expressions in their dram, with distilleries like Laphroaig and Ardbeg being iconic for their distinctive styles. There's now 9 working distilleries packed onto the island, with more on the way, so it's become a real hotspot for whisky fans around the world. Further down Scotland's west coast is Campbeltown. It's an interesting place. It was once host to over 34 distilleries and it was known as Whiskyopolis in its day. Now it only has 3 working distilleries, Springbank, Glen Scotia and Glengyle, but there are more on their way. There was a really dramatic decline in numbers, and that came about for a number of reasons. In the mid-1800s, an improvement in transport links to the north, particularly with the train lines, they encouraged more business in Speyside, and Campbeltown suffered. They also began to focus on mass production instead of quality, and that led to a lower standard in the product and a decline in sales. In terms of flavour, these distilleries produce very different whiskies from one another, and even possibly there's sometimes a bit of Irish influence. It's not far away across the water, where there's the use of triple distillation in some cases in Campbeltown. Lastly, let's head down south to the Lowlands, which is renowned for light, grassy, floral style whiskies. This region covers all the way from the borders to just south of Edinburgh and Glasgow, and it's the second largest region for whisky. Despite having a relatively small number of distilleries compared to its geographical size, the Lowlands has been one of the fastest growing locations for Scotch whisky, with many new distilleries popping up around Scotland's central belt. This offers a great chance for tourists to visit a Scotch whisky distillery without travelling north or travelling too far from Edinburgh or Glasgow as well now. These new players also defy the perceived regional flavour profiles by showcasing a real variety of whisky characters that are available across a region that's said to produce delicate whiskies. Now there are peated lowland whiskies from Glasgow, or Annandale near Dumfries, while 2 Glasgow distilleries also use triple distillation, again adding another unconventional side to modern Scotch, which is generally just double distilled. So why does location actually matter? And why does location or region matter to Scotch whisky? Well, the simple answer is, to be honest, it may not be all that relevant anymore. These regions were formed because unique geography, heritage, and resources led people to hold preconceptions about each region's character. It actually wasn't until 2009, it was that recently, that any legal definitions became clear. In 2009, the updated Scotch Whisky Regulations legislation set out precise geographical boundaries for 2 protected localities, those were Islay and Campbelltown, and 3 protected regions, the Highlands, Lowlands and Speyside. That means simply that only the distilleries within each of these areas could then use the region's name on their labels, nothing more than that. The truth is really, although these regions certainly have a historical relevance, modern distilleries have the freedom to produce like any characteristic they want. And although there are very broad characteristics that you tend to find in different areas across Scotland, the Scotch regions are to some extent less relevant in today's whisky landscape. Distilleries now have the resources and the freedom to pursue really whatever character they like, no matter what corner of the country they're based in. It could be a peated whisky from Ben Romach in Speyside, or a non-peated Bunnahabhain from Islay, which is, as we've said, is a very whether it's a peated Ben Romach from Speyside or the non-peated Bunnahabhain from Islay, the flavour of each whisky is really down to the unique distillation and the maturation journey each bottle has undergone. You can find other examples that make you realise how arbitrary some of the talk of regions is. On Arran now, for example, you've got 2 distilleries in the island. Loch Ranza is officially in the Highlands because it's in the north of the island, and the newer distillery Lag is in the Lowlands. Loch Lomond is another example. It's pretty much on the fault line between the Highlands and the Lowlands, but classifies itself as a Highland distillery. And Glengoyne famously distills its whisky in the Highlands and matures it across the road in warehouses that are officially in the Lowlands. Does it make any difference to the character of the whisky? That's up to you to judge. From the Society's point of view, we don't really talk about regions because our whisky comes from single casks, and that means that even from one distillery, different bottlings can have very, very different characters. Also, some distilleries run a peated production and an unpeated production at different times of the year. Bunnahabhain's another example of that, and there are other distilleries that do the same thing. So you've really got to approach it with an open mind and see what you like, more than thinking about it's going to have a certain character because it comes from a certain region. We don't talk about distilleries specifically at the Society, but this is a good example because it's a Speysider, so you might think it's one of these lighter, fruitier, honeyed whiskies that we associate with Speyside, but in this case, from Distillery 137, it's actually a peated malt. So just take it all with a pinch of salt. There are so many variables in both distillation and maturation that there really is an endless number of flavours to be explored. If you'd like us to make a video on the fascinating impact of casks, then please leave a comment and let us know down below. Cheers.